All right, welcome to Evergreen Perspective. I'm your host, Ben Chrisley, and we are here with the Kim Harless, council member, Vancouver. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, I've been trying to get you on for a little bit. We had some scheduling issues. We tried to get you on before the election, and so we didn't quite get there with that. But you just had a re-election. We just went through the process of re-election. And I know your first election, right? This is your second term. You're the incumbent.
Yep.
And your first election, you won by a handful of votes. Is that right?
Yeah, like less than 60.
So first time around, less than 60 votes. You've been in office doing your thing. Now we're into a re-election campaign. And your recent re-election campaign was very competitive heading into election day. Can you tell us about how this election was so much different than your first time around?
Yeah, I mean, there were some similarities. It was small grassroots versus big money. And so definitely had that sort of David and Goliath sort of feelings to it, both last time and this time, despite being an incumbent. But the way that this time was much different, because a lot of people would ask me or tell to me, they're like, oh, this is just a repeat of last time. And I was like, yes and no. And the reason it's different is, my opponent last time, John Blom, he did a more admirable campaign. There were no attack ads. There was no shadiness. It was, it was a good, clean campaign. I respect him for that, and anyone that runs a clean campaign. And so this time around was definitely different. This was new for Vancouver. It was new for me. Seeing that level of attack ads, it was incredibly unprecedented for let alone a city council race. And so that's ways it was much, much different.
Yeah. So with that, what do you think caused? I mean, obviously the opponent was driving that, but what do you think? Do you think there was an underlying cause of why it got so attack ad driven?
I don't. I mean, the only thing that really anyone can conclude is that it was the candidate themselves. I mean, usually if you see negative attack ads, it's usually from like an independent expenditure. It's from something outside the campaign, because you don't, as a candidate, want to associate with that kind of negative campaigning. But this one was different. These attack ads weren't coming from endorsements that she had. She had the realtors and she had the BIA, and both of them still did like respectable independent expenditure, flyers and ads and stuff that they did for her. But the ones that were the negative campaigns were coming out of her, like they were, vote, her campaign name. And so she had to sign off on those. And that is a little unusual. And so the only thing that really you can conclude, and of course it's just coming up with your own conclusions, is that, that's what she thought would be successful in this community and what would make her win. And at the end of the day, it was about winning.
Right. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you had the more the grassroots movement. And I think some would probably classify you. Maybe you classify yourself as an activist candidate. Would you still pitch yourself in that kind of time, in that frame?
Yeah, absolutely. I always chuckle a little bit when someone's like, tries to stereotype me as an establishment, because I'm very much not. Just because I'm an incumbent does not mean I'm part of the establishment by a long shot. Definitely still an activist, definitely grassroots, nonprofit, activism, people power. I mean, that's where I still sit, and I'm still, a minority in that situation too. I'm not part of the establishment, but it's funny how just by, people not really maybe knowing the details, can come up with conclusions. And then when they are confronted with the facts, they're like, oh, okay, actually, that's awesome.
Right. So, I mean, I got one of these here.
Oh,
One of these guys.
yeah.
There we go. And so I guess when I was looking at that, did that candidate I won't mention their name, but did that candidate work with a consultant out of Seattle on that campaign?
Yeah, that's what I mean, the PDC shows all, especially if somebody is doing what they're supposed to, which is reporting all their expenditures. And so, yeah, that was a firm outside of Seattle that's done a lot of, usually they do Democratic leaning candidates. Like, I think they've done like MGP's campaign, maybe some others, similar kind of big name campaigns that are at that congressional level. And so it's also unusual for someone at a city council level to be using one of those giant firms too.
What do you think it says about Vancouver and the voters that this big money negative push campaign wasn't enough to get it done? Because when it was all said and done, the race really wasn't all that competitive when the votes were tallied.
Yes. Yeah. And that was one of the things, especially the days leading up to the campaign or the election day. I was telling folks, I was like, yeah, of course I worry about my own race, but I worry for Vancouver because this, again, is unprecedented. And if she's successful, then my opponent, if they're successful, that would set a new precedent for negative campaign ads in our community, more money being dumped in our community, because my campaign went in the past and many other times for Vancouver. They have said, no, you can't buy a seat here. I think of Dawn Orange's race a number of years ago. Like, that was huge. It was one of the most expensive campaigns ever in Washington State. And Vancouver said, no, like, you can't buy a seat here. And so, but that was a long time ago. And so this was another test for Vancouver to be like, hey, things have changed. We're growing populations, lots of new folks here, lots of new voters here, people that have come of age, and they still said no. And so I'm really proud of Vancouver. So when people have reached out to me congratulating me, I'm like, it's not a win for me, it's a win for Vancouver, because I just can't imagine what it would be like if we started seeing that negative campaign ads being the normal day-to-day for our local elections, because voters are already apathetic, and when they see negative campaigns, it just makes them more not wanting to engage with politics, even though that dictates their day-to-day lives and how easy or difficult that is.
Right. With that, I think that, that's something that I'd like to see kept out of local politics, right? I mean, we're already starting to see some negative campaign ads coming out for, congressional seat.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
we just finished November, so I'm a little bummed to start seeing that already, but I
Oh,
hope
yes.
locally that we can keep that type of rhetoric out of local politics.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree.
congratulations on that win. Let's go ahead and shift gears here a little bit. Affordability is obviously a big issue across the board. And I know, city council, tries to do things that help mitigate some of that affordability issue. How do you feel like current housing policies like the Affordable Housing Fund or the multi-family tax
Mhm.
exemption, how do you feel like that's helping everyday folks things be more affordable?
Yeah. So this was when also, a lot of my opponent was campaigning about the cost of groceries and the cost of living and how, she's still showing up to things, talking about this. And it's like, you need to know what the job actually entails. And at the city council level, we have very little ability or tools or rights to be able to change those things. And not that I'm not looking into them. Definitely, that's where creativity comes in. I was just actually emailing yesterday about, look, I've longed envisioned, publicly owned grocery stores, but now that it's a topic again and I don't seem so fringe, I'm like, yay, let's talk about it. Anyways, the real issue that is so frustrating is the just rising wealth inequality and income inequality, and I can't do anything about that at the local level. And then the tool sets that are given to us to be able to, get revenue so that we can provide services like police and fire and et cetera, they're all usually either sales tax or property tax. And those are disproportionately affect, working families, low-income families, and not those that actually can afford to pay those taxes. And we can't, we try to do where we can to adjust those things. So, for example, the B&O tax, which we were one of the last, larger cities to implement that. And, it wasn't because we wanted to, it was because we had to. And so one of the things that I very quickly was like, well, what are we allowed to do when it comes to tiering? Can we somehow carve out that small businesses don't have to pay it? And how can we do it in some way that legally we're allowed to do? Because we have to be really careful that we're not treating too differently different types of businesses, for example, because that could be, interrupting, free trade and commerce and, treating people it was considered like discrimination in a different sense. And so we have to be really careful with how we implement those tools. But when it comes to affordable housing, again, very limited on our tools. I'm really happy we can do things like the Affordable Housing Fund, which, I was part of making sure that grew. That is neighbors helping neighbors through their property taxes and it's through voters. We put it on the ballot and then voters approve it. And they say, yes, I want to help my neighbors. I'm willing to pay a little bit extra so that somebody can have a roof over their head or stay in their homes, because some of that affordable housing goes towards the Affordable Housing Fund goes towards repairs on people's homes. So these are folks that are already in their homes. Maybe they've already paid their mortgage, but they're on maybe Social Security, right? And their house now needs this major roof done. And they're in this position where it's like, I can't afford the roof, but I need to have a home that's safe. And, I can either sell my house, under market because it has a bad roof and then get in an apartment that's not available, or we can just repair your roof through this affordable housing fund and keep this person from being on the streets. And so I'm really grateful for the Affordable Housing Fund to be able to do stuff like that. Because it's not just about building units that can only do so much. People often say you can't build yourself out of this crisis. And, that's partially true. But a lot of it is just keeping people from being homeless to begin with, or that goes way farther. It's way more expensive to get somebody off the streets and into a home than it is to keep them in their home to begin with.
Right. So you mentioned building a little bit. How can the city council help affect building within Vancouver? Talking permitting costs, zoning, those type of things. How does those things help create more growth or stifle the growth if we're, not getting a good balance there?
Yeah, so markets change. So, for example, earlier you mentioned the MFTE, and that is a huge tool that we have to try to encourage. It's originally designed for density. So it's designed to encourage more growth. Instead of maybe a developer building, I'm just going to use very small numbers for easy. Instead of a developer building 20 luxury condos of a big, larger size that aren't needed, it encourages density so that instead of 20, maybe we have 30 and they're more of a moderate price, that more people can afford, not just the wealthiest. So that's where the MFT comes in. And then there's also now new additions to it that are about, if a certain percentage is under income restricted, then they get certain benefits too. And it's all a tax. It's not like a write-off. It's like it defers it for later. And it's really helpful because also what happens is there's a lot of expense when it comes to building a new development. And one of those is the sales tax on construction, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where we can help. And then once the building's built, then they're having to pay, there's income taxes that are coming in from the residents or not income taxes, sorry, property taxes that come later. And if that vacant lot was vacant, there'd be nothing happening, right? So there's no revenue. And so that's where the trade-off happens. And you get revenue from something that's built. You don't get revenue from something that's a vacant lot. And so that helps encourage that growth. But what's different this year is that it hasn't been enough to encourage development. They're running into tariff issues. They're running into the rising cost of construction materials. They're rising, labor issues, et cetera, et cetera. And so even with the incentives that we've provided in the past, that hasn't been enough. And so this year we decided to, I think it was earlier this year, maybe in spring, decided to defer some of the permit fees too. And so instead of paying everything up front, we wait until the project is completed. and then they pay the permit fees, because that's also one of those costs. Like for a developer, it's like it's later down the road. Once the project is completed, it's a lot easier than having to do all these upfront costs. So that's another way that we try to encourage that development and growth, through the MFTE,
Why
through
do you?
deferment.
Yeah. Why do you think? Why do you think like the BIA and the realtors have a tendency to support more Republican-leaning candidates versus Democratic-leaning candidates when it seems like it would make sense to be the other way around in some regard because you're wanting more housing. Where do you think that disconnect is there on that, or why do you think it's partisan at all? I guess would be
Yeah.
maybe be a better question.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people have asked me that. They're like, why didn't the BIA endorse you? You're not anti-developer. I'm anti not making things like equal for folks. Like it shouldn't be at the expense of residents that, like that housing is a basic human right, in my opinion. So like someone shouldn't be profiting to begin with. And so like, how do we make it to where, but making a profit's fine. It's just about how much profit. And so I think that's where the difference is I see it as how do we balance these needs between the housing needs we have, but also making it so that, developers can build it. And how do we do it in a way that's equitable for everybody versus just free market, cut all fees, no, nothing, let them go wild, develop whatever they want. Um, you know, that's where I think the more right-leaning Republican folks kind of come in, where it's more libertarian style politics of just cut everything and let them do whatever they want. And so even if you're someone like me who tries to figure out a compromise so that, we're benefiting all parties that are part of this, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, they just want somebody for their business to just cut everything and let them do whatever they want. And so that's what I've been able to conclude, because I feel like I've done a really good job. I've had really good conversations with everybody. So I was really surprised that they endorsed my opponent. And that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've found it interesting. I've given that a lot of thought, and it can take you down several different roads. I've never come up with a final conclusion,
Yeah.
at all. They didn't endorse me for charter either, so
Yeah.
um, they didn't like something about the answers I gave. I'm not sure exactly what, but so I want to get back just a little bit because we talked about wages being low, right? And so as a council, when you guys are taking bids on projects, how does that come into play when you're looking at the work that needs to be done?
Like living wages or
Yeah, I guess, when we're choosing contractors to do work for the city, there's often this balance between, giving union workers a chance to get into these jobs.
oh, yeah.
We know that unions, pay better wages. So how do we make sure that a company's not coming in and just undercutting and paying poor wages to folks?
Yeah, so it's my understanding, and I don't have it in front of me, but we have a lot of policy level requirements, and that's where council comes in. Like we set policy level requirements, and then those then filter into staff who then actually do the RFP process and select a bidder. And then that then comes to council for approval. And so as long as that continues to work the way that it's supposed to, I mean, that's what you'll see. I mean, you'll see contracts that we're approving for standards that we've already set, such as, prevailing wages, internship requirements. And, a lot of these folks, because we often get reports back later, are either meeting or exceeding them. So that's been really, really cool to see. And then also there's fines and penalties where if they don't meet, like say the certain internship hours that or apprenticeship hours that they're supposed to do, there's fees associated with that. I know that I think maybe in my first year there was one contractor that came back and they couldn't for some reason meet the apprenticeship hours. And so it was a conversation, and yeah, it was something completely out of their control. There was something specific, and I can't remember if we ended up waiving those fees or not, but I feel like, they do a due diligence and they're very forthcoming with letting us know if they're not meeting them. But the last couple I've seen, when we have gotten reports back, they have been meeting or exceeding the apprenticeship hours, which is great.
No, that's amazing. And with that said, what do you think people misunderstand most about what the city council is doing in their job? Because if you get online and you listen to the comments, there's a lot of negative stuff, and nobody's ever doing anything, or they're
Yeah.
whatever. But what do you think people misunderstand most about the job of city council?
Yeah. And I think that's something that, especially folks that are moving from outside the area, they might not understand our form of government. So there are different types of city councils or commissions. So, for example, like Clark County, it used to be a commission before it was a council. And so commissioners, just like Portland, also had this change very recently. So, if it's a commissioner style government, then there's more direct control for those commissioners to direct staff. So, for example, like in Portland, each council member before would have like a very specific department they would run, and they are directing staff to do things. That's one form of government. And so if you come out of the area, you might be used to that. You might be like, hey, Kim, like, why aren't you implementing this one program? I can't, because our form of government is more like, I often tell people, it's more like an advisory council. We set high level policy, like I was just explaining with like apprenticeship hours and prevailing wages. We set that policy, but it's up to the city manager to then implement. The only employee we have is a city manager, and we share that employee. And we make sure that he's following through with implementing these high level policies. So we kind of like figure out and set the like what, and he figures out the how. And that's how it all comes together. And then there's that report back and discussion. But I can't tell like a very like, hey, we're going to implement this tomorrow. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I mean, would you want that? Would you like to have more say in those items? Do you think it'd be beneficial for the council, or do you feel like the form of government we currently have is efficient and it gets the job done?
There's trade-offs for sure. Would I want that? Absolutely, because I feel like I have some good ideas. And right now, if I want any of those ideas to happen, I need to convince at least, 3 other colleagues to get that majority. And, that can be a tough hurdle when you don't have folks that are in alignment with you. However, having this form of government does prevent a lot of corruption. And so I recognize that trade-off. And even if I don't have ill intentions, I do recognize that someone else could be there instead of me, which is also another reason, folks run for office, because we know there's someone else that would have ill intentions. So we want to make sure they don't get elected. And if those people were in office, like we saw with the county commission before it became a council, like severe corruption, nepotism, cronyism. I mean, that's the trade-off. Like, could you get a great candidate that implements great work? Yes. But you could also get a bad candidate that implements horrible work. And so that's the trade-off that we have to experience.
Right. And so, I mean, with that said, I mean, you've been pretty open about recent ethics complaints that have been waged. One of them specifically against you. What's been your experience with that? Obviously, with the ethics complaint being waged, and then you got to step into a room with your fellow counselors and make a vote on whether that should go. Can you just kind of tell us about how that went for you in the larger picture?
Yeah, I mean, it's still going. And so I have a lot to say. But first and foremost, what's most important, especially talking with other elected officials from around the area, they're like, oh, ethics complaint? Oh, don't worry about that. That happens all the time. People file those. Anyone can file those. But of course, because I'm a very caring person, I try to carry myself every day as, making sure every decision, everything I'm doing, I'm always trying to be the best person I can be. Because at the end of the day, like, that's all you have. Is your reputation and your integrity, and that's what people will remember. And so when this first happened, I was absolutely devastated. I was like, shit, did I do something wrong? Like, just devastated. And I started deep diving into it, trying to understand it. And that's where I found that there was actually a lot of errors with the policy itself. So I had to take a risk, because if you're ever coming across as defensive, people think that you're guilty. And so I had to be very careful and make a decision.
Can you tell us a little bit about what happened and why the ethics complaint came about?
Yeah. So I had been the chair of LTAC for almost 4 years now. And LTAC is a commission that is comprised of hoteliers and nonprofit organizations. And that's dictated by state law, who's on that commission, and they're appointed by city council. But what's required is that one of us has to be the chair, which is a little unusual. So somebody on council has to be the chair. And that has been appointed to me for many years. And so people apply, the committee comes together, they evaluate how to spend the dollars that come in. It's a small little fee for every hotel stay that goes towards this bucket. That's why there's hoteliers on there. And then applicants come in, and then the commission decides, and then that then goes to city council. And so I started dating an individual who then applied for a grant, and I didn't really think much of it. I was just like, okay, he's part of the process. I'm just the chair. I don't dictate dollars. Like, my commission comes to a vote. It's always been unanimous. I just vote last and I vote in agreement. Then it goes on to city council, and then city council votes on it, and it passes. And somebody filed an ethics complaint saying there was a violation, like of conflict of interest and an appearance of a conflict of interest. And so that complaint then went through, and I had to figure out, wow, what? Because it was just like, I was just kind of thrown back, like, what conflict of interest? I have no financial interest. We're not married. I always hesitate about how deep to dive into this stuff, but like, my life and people that actually know me, like, the last thing I would be doing is giving somebody a favor that I'm dating because of my background and my history with like bad relationship experiences. And so it's kind of comical. And then also, my last several years on the committee, one of the first things I noticed was just how kind of, there wasn't really guidelines for how things were determined on the LTAC commission. And so I implemented like a grading rubrics from my experience working for the government. Like, that's what you do, is you create a grading rubrics. It's a tool. That way you're taking out any of that bias that people might unknowingly have. And so it's funny that I like brought integrity into this process, and then I'm being accused of the opposite. So that's what happened. They filed an ethics complaint, and then there's a whole series. It's within the council's policies of what that then looks like as it continues on through its life cycle. So we're still in that process.
So you're still in the process now, and having been in it now and going through it and coming back and trying to work on that framework a little bit better, how do you feel like the process is?
It's messed up. It's for so many reasons it's messed up. In the very, very beginning, because I don't think they've had to do this. I don't know when they've had to. And so when it first landed, it was like the policy itself, and this is council policy. This is not state law. This is not anything like that. It is a council policy. Council policy means that the council at some point in the past came up with this policy. And it says that a complaint has to go to the attorney's office. The attorney then like does a memo. Well, that couldn't happen because there's conflict of interest with the attorney's office, because I had gone to the attorney's office for advice throughout my entire, time. And so they had to, the process then is if the attorney can't, or no, then it needs to, sorry, I'm getting things mixed up.
That's okay.
The process is then a different memo had to get created by a different attorney. And then the next process is that the council can send it to a hearings examiner. Hearings examiners don't do ethics complaints. They do land use issues. And so first of all, the policy doesn't work because, what happened? Council moved it on to a hearings examiner, and the hearings examiner's like, I don't do these. And so then we had to the council had to find, well, not the council, the city manager and the attorney's office, find someone who could actually take it on. And so just the process itself doesn't work because hearings examiners don't do that. So that's just a basic thing that has to get fixed. The other issue with the policy is how vague it is. So, in doing my research on, what are these appearance of impropriety or appearance of conflict, what does that mean? And usually when it's outlined in a policy, it is very directly about action that's taken. Like if you took an action that would suggest that you were specially treating someone like, you know, the classic example is like you have a contractor friend and a contract comes in front and you kind of like are like pushing like, oh, well, I think we should consider, or you say some favorable things about this contract that you know your friend owns. And so other people, it makes people uncomfortable. They're like, oh, I feel like they're pushing, you know, their friend's contract service. And so that's where it's supposed to normally come in. But our policy doesn't say that. It's very, very vague. And so people are taking it as their own interpretation, which is like, I feel like it's about feelings instead of an actual action. And so that's where things are kind of in limbo, where I have to see how, you know, this thing ends up shaking out, because that's the real uncertainty, is how is this lawyer that's going to be looking at it deciding how that specific policy is going to be interpreted. And I don't know. And so, and because appearances and feelings are subjective, it really puts at risk everybody. Like, another example I gave was I had also someone come to public comment for LTAC, and we had a Pride application. And the person at public comment said, I don't think you should be voting for any of this because of your LGBTQ identity. You want a Pride event here, and so you have a conflict of interest. So, like, that is a feeling, or that is a bias. And so that's where it's like, does that fall in that policy? I don't know. If me and Diana support Spanish translation, that helps our families. Is that an appearance of a conflict of interest? Maybe, you know? And so as long as it's vague like that, it can be weaponized. And that's where we need to fix it, because that is a threat to democracy, to bog down the system. It's definitely bogged down me at an emotional level, and it prevents me from doing good work because I'm having to deal with these things. And that's what people do, is they find ways to weaponize policies to bog down government so it's ineffective. Right. And that's what we're experiencing.
And inevitably, good governance is having clear direction and things in place so that it can't be so vague. And I think that's where good governance comes in. You know, and we talked about a little bit earlier, you know, you've often been described, or maybe even self-described, as an activist politician, if that's a term. But so, you know, there's, you know, advocacy and governance, right? And so, you know, having both that you're after, you know, how do you balance between champion something as an advocate and then, you know, figuring out how to get that into governance in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think that is the hat switching. So I'm very careful that when I'm in my council member, you know, position, when I'm wearing that hat, that looks a lot different. That is, I'm in an like I said, it's more of an advisory role. Like, I can't come in and just change things. And so that's where it's about activating the community. It's about bringing attention to issues. It's about listening and hearing. And so my activist hat more comes out on the outside, out in community, when I'm not necessarily always having that council member hat on, because I want to be very careful that I'm not, you know, confusing those different roles. Because what I'm elected to do and what's in the charter for me to do it is different.
So do you feel like you've ever had the need to compromise one of those values to move a policy forward?
I mean, certainly. I mean, otherwise nothing would get done, right? Well, I'd just be outvoted too, but I mean, that's democracy, right? But I have been, you know, doing a lot of work these last 4 years to try to build more bridges than burn them. And I believe we have a lot more in common than we have different. So that's been more of my policy style rather than coming in swinging. So probably, but it's about the greater good.
Right. I think, and when you look at the recent federal meeting between a high-level mayor and the president, for example, I'll keep names out of it, but when we look at that, right, when you look at that news conference they had together, and they're talking about, hey, we had a lot more in common than we thought. You know,
Yeah,
I was like, yeah, most people do,
yeah,
right?
most do.
I, it was interesting to see, and I hope that maybe there's more trickle down that we can talk about things. How much, I guess, how much residents, the residents here, how much do you think they understand about how much negotiations that happen, out in the open, and then even off camera, so to speak? What do you think most residents miss that piece? Is they just think there's some train driving down the tracks and it's all going the same direction and everybody's
Mhm.
going that way. What do you think they miss out there?
I think one of the biggest things is actually, you're kind of alluding to it, is there's not really discussions necessarily behind the scenes because we're not allowed to. Everything you see at the council meetings, that is the discussion. Like, staff might come to us and give us briefings, but we always have to be in a subquorum, so it's always going to be 3 people or less. And we're not allowed to have discussions anytime that it's not publicly noticed, where, especially where there's a quorum of council, where business could be discussed and have action. And so there's not a whole lot behind the scenes happening. It'd be nice if maybe there was more, just because there is a lot of discussions that need to happen, and we're limited to that time on council and those subquorums. But I wish there was a lot more going on. I wish there was a lot more communication. But that, again, is our form of government. Like, our form of government's different. Like, we're more there to show up, make decisions, hear from the community, look at public comment. And the public comment that's the other thing. I don't think people realize how much public comment does make a difference. It makes a huge difference. And, some people get, like, they'll submit comment and then it doesn't go their direction and then they stop. And I would really encourage for people not to do that, because sometimes, like, it might have been what they wanted. It was like this close, but maybe they didn't know that. And so they just need to keep trying and keep trying. And the more that people do public comment, the more their name is seen and recognized, and they go, oh, what is so-and-so saying again? Okay. Like, I've definitely come to recognize some names. Both good and bad. And because there's other people that are submitting comment too that are just like, it's so wild and far and self-serving that, if we're not getting also the people that like what's happening or want us to move continuously in that direction, and all we're hearing is people that are very self-serving and want everything to go backwards, it's kind of hard when that's all you're seeing. As an elected official, you might think, am I actually representing the community or not, when nobody's showing up and speaking in the same way that I think? And you start having these sort of, am I doing the right thing for the people if it might not be something they actually want?
Right. And I think that's part of it, And so a lot of people out there are always talking about when you get online, what you see a lot is we got a lot of people out there screaming all this corruption's going on in the mayor's office, at the city council. They're all taking kickbacks
That's the funniest
and
one.
all these monies, and I see this
Yeah.
all the time, and I just kind of shake my head. But if you could talk to people, for folks, about that, and just how would you address that, if you could just address it to everybody right now?
Yeah. I mean, it's impossible. First of all, it's impossible. There's so many checks and balances that it's literally impossible. And, I think people get jaded by things that they see at the federal level and think that all politics is like that. And it's not true. Local level, yes, there can be corruption like we talked about earlier, but that's not our form of government. That's not what's happening at Vancouver City Council. Um, and I think people misunderstand, and I get really sad about it because, people feel like the whole system needs to get torn down, but really it's just certain parts that do. And the whole system is not like that. And we need to make sure that we cherish the things that are working. And it's impossible for us to get kickbacks. We are volunteers at the end of the day. We get a tiny, tiny stipend that barely covers, like, your emotional toil of having to be there. And it's definitely, no one's doing it for the money, that's for sure. But it does help, especially paying for expenses. That's where it is helpful so that you can keep doing the job, especially if you have another job that you're having to do, which all of us do except for a couple. It's impossible. And yeah, it's funny because it's just like, it's comical because it's impossible. It would never happen. And I'm like, can you just come to City Hall and talk to us? Because you've created this thing in your head based off of something that's probably at the federal level, and it's just not like that.
Right, because I mean, there's signs all over town.
Yeah,
Kick out the corrupt, so and
yeah,
so, and this and
yeah.
that. So, I think what we hear that around the most these days, and I wouldn't be doing our audience or you justice if we didn't talk about the I-5 bridge. Uh,
Oh, that's not my pet project. That's the mayor's.
I know. So what do you think? I guess I just like to get your thoughts on how did a bridge become so partisan, at a political level as opposed to just a means of infrastructure and transportation?
I definitely have stayed out of that as much as possible because I think I probably am in the same bucket of a vast majority of the public, which is just get the damn bridge done. Like, I just want a bridge. I want a bridge that's not going to fall apart the next minor earthquake we have, that, I can get across safely on my bike or walking, or even, oh my gosh, take light rail across because I don't feel like driving my car. Like, I just want the bridge done. End of story. Like, we can talk about the past and how things have happened, but honestly, the point that I'm at with it is just like, just get it done. I don't care what happened in the past. Let's just look at what's happening now and just get it built because it has been way overdue.
I gotta say, obviously, I spend a lot of time out in the community talking with the folks, and I'd say majority of the folks that I talk to, that's pretty much the consensus is.
Yes, just get it done. Let's stop talking about it. Let's just get it done. I just want it done.
Been a long time.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about kind of corruption and some of the vitriol that's kind of out there in the world of screaming. I like to do a little segment here on the show. It's kind of your welcome to politics moment. And it could be something funny or sad or mean. I've heard several different iterations of it, but it's basically that moment when it's like, oh, crap, I'm in politics now.
I don't know. There's a lot of things I probably wouldn't air.
Share. It's fine. It's just you and me here. It's just you and me.
Oh, yeah, right. No, just because, I mean, there's definitely a lot of egos to navigate. And what I will say was I was definitely naive when I got first elected to city council. And I had assumed wrongly that my leadership style was the same as everybody else's. And that was definitely a big aha moment where I had I'm a hopeless optimistic, like think the best of everybody. And then that definitely, it was a meet your idols moment where I was like, oh, this is how it actually is. This is not what I have read in the newspapers. This is not what I thought I was going to come into. I thought I was going to have open arms, people helping me navigate how to be onboarded, people, just being very encouraging and wanting to get me caught up to speed. And no, it was very much like, here you go. Here's a laptop and a phone. Figure it out. And then the other council members not helping. And then me and Diana just looking at each other like, that's why me and Diana have gotten so close. Because both of us were just kind of thrown in, like, what are we supposed to do? Like, why is no one showing us what we're supposed to do?
Because you guys came in office at the same time.
Yeah.
And so she was recently reelected as well. And then Eric maintained his seat also. So no new members coming on to the council.
Yes.
And so I guess in the future, so just got elected. It's a 4-year term, right? And so what are your hopes and goals for this next term now that, you've obviously got a lot of experience under your belt. You're no longer the rookie on the panel. What's your What are you thinking for this next term?
Yeah, I'm really excited for this next term. Come January, come after all this ethics bullshit is done. And we're past that and moving on and looking towards the future because I definitely feel a large wave of confidence that I wasn't privileged to have last time. I was elected with just a handful of votes. I'm the youngest person on council, despite almost reaching 40 now. And, I was seen as, like you said, the rookie, even though Diana elected at the same time, and this time I won by a large majority. And unlike the rest of the council, including the mayor herself, did not have this kind of money that was spent against them. So I really feel really confident going into this next term, being able to really voice what I feel because I feel like it does represent what the people wanted. And the numbers prove it, both money and everything. So I'm really excited for a number of things, which are things I campaigned on, which is first, just finishing the work that I started, such as the comp plan update, making sure that's completed successfully. That was going to end this year, but it's moved on into next year as well. So we want to make sure that that's done in a very equitable, strong way that represents what people have been asking for, which is, improved density, smart growth, transportation corridors, climate, resiliency, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really passionate for that. I'm really excited about further implementing the climate action framework. I'm the only, I have an environmental science background. Diana has biology background. And so this is one that I have a lot of knowledge in, and I want to make sure is done, through a environmental justice lens. And we've gone really far already so far. And I just want to make sure that it continues to be implemented. And we're going to have some tough decisions coming into the next year too. So I'm really excited to be there, to be part of that vote. These are things that people have been worried about when it comes to implementing some of the later policies for building codes and et cetera. And so I'm really excited about that. I mean, there's always new issues that arise. And so I'm really excited about those aspects. One of the things that, like we talked about earlier, which is that city council, it is pretty limited on what you're able to do. However, one of the things that now I have under my cap is name recognition to go and lobby in Olympia. And so, I've continued to develop my relationships with state reps and our state senators and, the governor, and to make sure that they're aware of the issues that are happening in our city. Things that are outside of my control, like we talked about, wealth inequality, income inequality. I can't do anything about that. And I can't do anything about the grocery store prices. There's some clever things, but at the end of the day, that's state level. And so I'm really excited. I've already started conversations with, Senator Cortez and Stonier about issues in our city that really they need to be the ones making those changes. And so I'm excited to move those forward.
I think it's important that elected leaders in Southwest Washington as a whole really come together and have great dialogue and good conversation. And that's, all the elected officials so that we can pull towards the same direction to make sure that we don't get left out down here in Southwest Washington and get swept underneath the SeaTac area. I think that's pretty important piece of stuff there. That's good to hear. And then I guess, talk about the loud voices that are out there. As an elected official and you're on the council, how do you discern the difference between people who have legitimate, gripes or complaints, and maybe a solution to go with them versus those that are at the extreme end? How do you drown out or hone in on what the people are really wanting?
Yeah, and I think that comes with, experience. Definitely in the beginning, probably was taking some comment, and then I was educated about some of these individuals that, like I was saying earlier, it's very self-serving. It might be driven by hate. But, I always I always think the best of everybody. And so I usually go into everything that I hear from folks assuming the best. And it's up to them to break that down because I'm always assuming the best of everybody. And usually it comes down to, are they doing this for their own self-interest? And if so, is it something that's about like their home and their family and, like something that's personal to them, or is it to push down somebody else, right? Because like, yes, there's things that can be self-serving, but they can also be from different, whether it's a safety concern for them and their family versus I'm afraid of, for example, unhoused people and I want them to all just be kicked out of the city. Like those are very different perspectives that are both self-serving, but how you implement it can harm people or not harm people. And so those are the public comments that I try to discern, where is it coming from? Is the solution they're presenting, will it hurt other people? And then where's that compromise? And so that just comes with experience.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. I think that's a great way of looking at it, is the difference between, is this helping people as a whole, or is it putting another group of people down?
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Or even if it's like, people come, we've had a lot of contentious conversation about, even the comp plan right now. And, different neighborhoods have reached out saying they don't like the zoning for them. And so having a conversation about that, because would that affect other people? Maybe, maybe not. And, if someone comes and they have a concern that's very unique to just their property, but it doesn't hurt anyone. Like it doesn't have to like every decision doesn't have to benefit everybody, right? But it can, if it doesn't negatively affect people and it would make this certain neighborhood or this area or this certain property thrive just within their own little tiny pocket. Sure. That sounds great. Like I want to know those issues too.
Yeah, I think that gets a little tricky, right? I mean, I think what we're after is at least I know I am, I won't speak for you, but I would assume is the greatest good for the greatest amount of folks out there, right? It's
Absolutely
looking through that lens of, humans first is kind of like to come through there.
Yes.
And so I guess as we kind of reach towards wrapping up here on the podcast, if you could just give some words out there, if people were listening and they were like, they're feeling, like maybe the government's not working for them, and they have this trust issue with the government, what would you tell those folks to kind of, help them have a better feeling about the government?
Yeah. Well, I would say their feelings are absolutely legitimate. I have those feelings too. And however, folks that have those feelings are the exact people that need to show up, because in lack of them showing up, it's status quo. And so if you actually want the system to change in the ways that you want to see, you have to actually show up, not be a keyboard warrior, not be a keyboard politician or a keyboard lawyer or keyboard anything. You need to actually show up. And it is amazing how much change can happen if people actually show up. But as long as folks just want to talk about it and not actually do something, it's going to be status quo. So I say, please show up. It makes a world of a difference. And every voice, I know it's so cliche, but it's true. Every voice, every vote does count, does make a difference. I mean, it's that classic story of like the ants and the grasshoppers, right? In that one movie. It's just like, yes, like if every single ant's like, I'm too little, then nothing happens. But every person, by you taking a strong stance, someone else will see you too. And they'll be like, oh, that person's showing up. Okay, I have a friend. I'm going to go too. Or I'm going to go do that, and there's so much camaraderie that can just make a huge difference to break up that status quo that we're all upset with.
I think that's an amazing place to wrap up. Kim, thank you for coming on the show. You've touched on so much, and I know you're out in the community continuing to do a lot of good work. And I look forward to seeing you out at the next event. I know you're out there getting stuff done and not just waiting for re-election time. So
no, I've always been there. Wasn't my first time at any of those places on the campaign trail. And also, congratulations to you. I'm really excited for you and, your fellow commissioners that will be there. And, that's part of my legacy, too, that you'll now get to see of all the work we couldn't get done because we were trying to do everything. So I'm really excited for what you and the rest come up with, because that's part of my story, too.
Oh, well, we look forward to keeping you informed and hope you show
Yes.
up at some of the community forums or have around.
Oh, I definitely have things to say.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Kim.
Yeah, thank you.